The courtroom was heavy with silence that morning, the kind of silence that carried 1,000 untold stories. Outside, the sky was gray, as if even the clouds were holding their breath. Inside, James sat beside Diep, his hand gently clasping hers, his thumb brushing over her trembling fingers. It was the final hearing, the day that would decide the fate of little Nee, the child they had raised, loved, and called their own. Across the room sat Nee's grandmother, an elderly woman whose face was marked by both strength and sorrow. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, her hands clutching a small handkerchief. Though her heart was heavy, she still believed Nee should stay with her, for she was the only blood family left. But Diep's heart was no less filled with love. She looked toward the little girl sitting quietly beside the court clerk, her small legs swinging above the floor, eyes wide with confusion. Diep's chest tightened as memories flashed through her mind, nights spent comforting Nee through her fever, mornings when the little one clung to her neck whispering, "Don't go, Mommy." The lawyer's voice broke the silence. "Your Honor, my clients, James and Diep, are not related to this child by blood, but they have cared for her since the day she was left alone. They've given her not just food and shelter, but love, the kind of love that heals." James stood. His voice was calm, but his eyes glistened. "Your Honor," he began, "I may not be her biological father, but I have carried her in my heart since the first time she called me Dad. Every laugh, every tear, she is my daughter, and Diep, she is her mother in every way that matters." Diep couldn't stop the tears streaming down her face. She looked at the judge and whispered, "I only want her to have a home. Not a big one, not rich, just one filled with warmth and love." The judge remained silent, flipping through documents, while the courtroom held its breath. Then, in the corner of the room, a small voice suddenly broke the stillness. "Mom." Everyone turned. Nee was standing there, her small hand pointing toward Diep, her eyes innocent and full of longing. "I want to go home with Mom and Dad." The room froze. Even the grandmother's tears began to fall. James slowly knelt down, arms open, and Nee ran into them, wrapping her tiny arms around his neck. Diep covered her mouth, sobbing quietly as the entire courtroom watched the purest truth unfold before their eyes, the truth of love that no law could fully define. At that moment, James realized that no matter what the verdict would be, something had already been decided. In Nee's heart, they were her family. The lawyer looked at the judge, his voice steady but emotional. "Sometimes, Your Honor, it's not blood that defines a family, it's love." The judge's pen paused midair. For the first time that day, his eyes softened. Outside, a faint ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, spilling through the high courtroom windows and landing gently on the trio, James, Diep, and little Nee, as if the heavens themselves were watching. The trial wasn't over yet, but in that moment, hope began to bloom. The next morning, the courtroom was filled again. The tension lingered in the air, heavy yet fragile, as though one single breath could shatter it. Diep and James sat quietly, hands intertwined, their faces pale but determined. They knew this was the final chance, the moment when truth would either set them free or break them apart. The grandmother, Mrs. Hoa, was called to the stand. Her steps were slow, her shoulders slightly hunched. Years of hardship showed in every wrinkle on her face. As she took the oath, her voice trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of love and loss. "I only want what's best for my granddaughter," she began softly. "After my daughter passed away, I was all she had left. But I am old now, my health isn't good. I don't have much money, and the house leaks when it rains." She paused, her eyes clouded with tears. "Still, I feared losing her. She's my daughter's last memory." The courtroom fell silent. Even Diep's heart ached at those words. She understood that kind of love, the desperate need to hold on to something so you don't lose everything. Then, with a gentle but firm voice, the judge asked, "Do you believe that James and Diep love the child?" Mrs. Hoa looked toward them. James sat upright, his gaze steady. Diep's eyes were wet but full of compassion, and little Nee, who was sitting between the court officers, was drawing something quietly on a piece of paper. Mrs. Hoa took a deep breath. "Yes," she said finally. They love her. I've seen it. When I visited their home, I saw my granddaughter laughing again, something I hadn't seen in a long time. I saw her run to Diep, call her mom, and sleep peacefully in her arms. Her voice broke. I just didn't want to lose her too soon. But maybe love means letting go. If it makes her happier. A murmur rippled through the room. Even the judge looked moved. The lawyer stepped forward again, holding up Nee's drawing. "Your Honor," he said gently, "this is what the child drew while we were speaking." The judge took the drawing. It showed 3 stick figures, a tall man, a woman with long hair, and a small child between them, all holding hands under a yellow sun. At the bottom, in messy letters, it read, "Mom, Dad, me, our home." Diep burst into tears. James lowered his head, his shoulders trembling. The judge placed the drawing on his desk and looked around the courtroom. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the simplest truth comes from the smallest heart." Mrs. Hoa covered her face with her handkerchief. "If the law says they can raise her," she whispered, "then I will bless them. Just promise me one thing, never let her forget her mother." James stood up, walked to her, and knelt down respectfully. "I promise," he said. "We will tell her every story about her mother, with love, not with pain. And she will always know she had 2 women who loved her deeply." The old woman nodded, her tears falling freely. At that moment, the atmosphere in the courtroom changed. The cold walls seemed to soften. The faces around them were no longer of strangers, but witnesses to something profoundly human, the triumph of compassion over pride. Outside, the light grew brighter, and though the verdict had not yet been read, everyone could feel that the heart of the battle had already been won, not by argument, but by love. The air in the courtroom was thick with silence. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for the words that would decide the fate of one small child and the hearts of 3 adults who loved her in their own ways. The judge adjusted his glasses, glanced once more at the drawing on his desk, and then looked directly at James and Diep. After reviewing all evidence, testimony, and emotional welfare of the child, he began solemnly, "This court acknowledges that Mr. James and Ms. Diep have provided a stable and loving home for baby Nee. The bond between them and the child is evident, not built on papers, but on genuine care and affection." James felt his chest tighten. Diep squeezed his hand so hard that her nails pressed into his skin. They didn't dare to move, not even breathe. The judge continued, his tone softening. "Therefore, by the power vested in this court, I hereby grant full guardianship and parental rights of baby Nee to Mr. James and Ms. Diep." It was as if time stopped for a second. Then suddenly the air filled with sobs. Diep covered her face, tears pouring down her cheeks. James bowed his head, his shoulders trembling. For the first time in so many months, he let himself cry freely, not from pain, but from relief so powerful it shook him to his core. Across the room, Mrs. Hoa, the grandmother, sat still for a long moment. Then she smiled faintly, though tears glistened in her eyes. "It's okay," she whispered to herself. "She's home." Little Nee, who had been sitting quietly beside the officer, looked around in confusion at first. Then she saw James wiping his tears and Diep reaching out to her. The girl's eyes brightened. She slipped off the chair, ran as fast as her little legs could carry her, and threw herself into Diep's arms. "Mommy," Nee cried out, her voice echoing in the courtroom. Diep froze. Her arms instinctively wrapped around the child, holding her tight, trembling from head to toe. "Sweetheart," she whispered between sobs, "say it again. Please, say it again." Nee pulled back just a little, touched Diep's cheek, and said softly but clearly, "Mommy." James knelt down beside them, his face wet, his smile shaking. "And me?" he asked, his voice breaking with emotion. The little girl turned, her eyes full of innocence and joy. She reached out her small hands toward him. "Daddy," she said. That single word, "Daddy," melted every wall James had ever built around his heart. He pulled both of them into his arms, holding them as if he'd never let go again. Around them, even the officers and court staff wiped their eyes. The judge smiled gently. "It seems," he said quietly, The verdict was already written in her heart long before today. Mrs. Hoa stood up slowly and walked over to them. Diep looked up, worried. But the old woman only smiled and placed a trembling hand on Nie's head. "My little girl," she said softly, "you have a new family now. But remember, your grandmother will always love you too." Nie nodded, still clutching Diep's shirt. "I love you, Grandma," she whispered. The old woman hugged her gently, then turned to James and Diep. "Take good care of her," she said, her voice warm yet heavy with emotion. "And take care of each other. Family is not given by law, it's chosen by love." James bowed his head. "We promise," as they walked out of the courtroom together. James holding Nie in his arms, Diep walking beside him. Sunlight pouring through the tall glass doors. It felt like the world outside had suddenly opened again. The case was over. The law had spoken. But more importantly, love had triumphed.
The evening sun poured its golden light over the small countryside house, casting a soft glow through the open window where the gentle wind carried the scent of blooming jasmine. For the first time in months, everything felt calm, not the fragile silence of worry, but the peace that comes after a long storm. James parked the car in front of the house, turned to look at Diep and Nie, and smiled. "We're home," he said quietly.
Nie clapped her tiny hands, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Home. Mommy, Daddy, we're home." Diep opened the door and lifted Nie into her arms. The little girl buried her face into Diep's shoulder, her laughter echoing through the yard. James stood there for a moment, watching the two of them, his whole world captured in a single scene, and his heart ached with overwhelming love. Inside, the small dining table was already set. Diep had cooked Nie's favorite dish, rice with braised pork and vegetables. The smell filled the house, warm and comforting. James helped set out the bowls while Diep placed the dishes carefully, humming softly under her breath. Nie ran around the table, arranging the chopsticks in her own messy way. "Daddy sits here. Mommy sits here. Nie sits in the middle," she declared proudly. James laughed, the kind of deep, unguarded laugh he hadn't known for years. "Yes, ma'am," he said, pretending to salute. "Our little boss is giving orders again." They all sat together, the clinking of chopsticks, the sound of Nie's laughter, the occasional teasing between James and Diep. It was simple, ordinary, yet it felt extraordinary. After dinner, Diep carried Nie outside to the porch. The night sky was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet dark. James followed them, bringing a small blanket. He wrapped it around the two most precious people in his life and sat down beside them. Nie leaned against Diep, her eyelids growing heavy. "Mommy, Daddy, can we always stay together like this?" she murmured sleepily. Diep kissed her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart, always." James looked at them, the woman who had healed his heart, and the little girl who had taught him how to love without condition. His throat tightened, and before he could stop it, tears slipped down his cheeks. Diep turned to him in surprise. "James, why are you crying?" He smiled, brushing a tear away. "Because I finally have everything I ever prayed for," he whispered. "You and her. My family." Diep reached out, resting her head on his shoulder. Nie had already fallen asleep, her tiny hands still gripping James's finger. The moonlight touched their faces gently, three souls bound not by blood, but by love, forgiveness, and fate. In that quiet night, James realized something profound. The battles they fought, the tears they shed, the laws they faced, all of it led them here, to this fragile yet beautiful moment of togetherness. He tightened his arm around Diep and looked up at the stars. "Thank you," he whispered to the universe, his voice trembling with gratitude. "Thank you for giving me my family back." And for the first time in a very long time, James didn't feel the weight of the past, only the light of the future, shining in the laughter of a little girl and the warmth of the woman he loved. Their home, once empty, was now filled with life. Their hearts, once broken, now beat as one. And that night, beneath the peaceful sky, the family of three finally found their forever.